The unthinkable has happened. Amy Fleming, the heart and soul of Heartland, the woman who's held everything together through love, loss, and the unbreakable bond with horses, is now at the center of a devastating twist. In the shocking season 19 finale, fans are about to experience a heartbreak that will change everything. Amy's fate is hanging by a thread, and with it, the future of Heartland itself. The story that's defined so many lives is about to take a turn no one saw coming. Are you ready for the most heart-wrenching, game-changing moment in the show's history? Brace yourself. This is a ride you won't forget. The season began on a note of optimism. Amy Fleming had just achieved a major breakthrough in her career. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she was truly making progress, working with some of the most challenging horses she had ever encountered. Heartland seemed more united than ever. The family was finding personal victories, and while Ty's memory still lingered in the air like a shadow, Amy seemed to be moving forward. She had become stronger with each passing day, slowly navigating life without him as the ranch continued to thrive. But beneath the surface, something was changing. The small, almost imperceptible shifts began to make Amy uneasy. It started with things she could explain away: a misplaced tool here, an unfamiliar unease in the horse's eyes there. Conversations with her family members began to carry an unexpected weight, and the once effortless interactions with her loved ones now felt strained. Amy tried to dismiss these feelings, but deep down, something didn't feel right. It wasn't just the usual stress of running Heartland and carrying the legacy of Ty Borden. This was different. The unease wasn't just in her own heart. Lou, once a pillar of support, had started to retreat into herself, her thoughts constantly elsewhere. Peter, too, seemed distant, as though there was something he wasn't sharing with her. Jack, the steady foundation of the family, was quieter than usual. He seemed to be staring off into the distance, as if he too could sense that something was amiss. Amy couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. A storm was brewing, one she wasn't prepared for. And neither was Heartland. Then, in the dead of night, the call came. It was urgent, filled with a sense of panic. Amy rushed to the phone, heart pounding, her mind already racing through all the possible scenarios. She didn't recognize the voice, but the words sent a chill down her spine. "You need to come to the ranch now." Something's wrong. It's about Ty. Her heart skipped a beat. Could it be that the legacy of Ty Borden, the very thing she had been trying to protect, was in jeopardy once again? Could it be an intruder, someone threatening her family's safety? Amy had to know. She grabbed her coat, dashed out of bed, and rushed to the ranch, her mind spiraling with fear. When she arrived, the ranch felt eerily quiet. The horses were uneasy, restless, the kind of unsettled energy that Amy had never encountered before. The barn door stood ajar, and as Amy stepped inside, she was met with an unsettling sight: a single cryptic note pinned to the wall. The words burned into her mind. "The past can't stay buried." Her heart sank. The message wasn't just a warning, it was a sign that something much bigger, something far darker, was at play. Amy stood frozen, staring at the note, wondering what it meant. Was this a reminder of the past, a warning from a time she thought was long behind her, or was it a harbinger of something more sinister to come? With no answers in sight, Amy couldn't help but feel the weight of everything pressing down on her. She was determined to face whatever was coming, to fight for her family, for Heartland. But she had no idea what that fight would cost her, or who, if anyone, would survive the coming storm. Days passed after Amy's unsettling discovery in the barn, but the tension at Heartland only grew. Amy couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, something ominous that no one could see, but that was slowly wrapping around them like a tightening noose. Despite her growing unease, she did her best to keep things as normal as possible. She worked with the horses, trying to carry on with the routines that had always given her comfort, but nothing felt right. Her thoughts kept drifting back to the cryptic note and the chilling words that still echoed in her mind. The past can't stay buried. Amy had always been the rock of Heartland, the one who held things together, but now she was feeling the weight of it all. Her confidence, once unshakable, was beginning to crack. Every small noise, every strange look from the people around her felt like a warning, a sign that something was lurking just out of sight, waiting to strike. The air around Heartland had changed. The ranch, once a sanctuary, now felt like a battlefield, and the walls seemed to be closing in. The family began to notice it too. Lou, who had always been the one to keep everyone grounded, seemed distracted, as though her mind was elsewhere. Her usual optimism had been replaced by a growing sense of concern. Peter, Amy's husband, had become more withdrawn, like a man carrying a heavy burden he wasn't ready to share. And then there was Jack, the patriarch of the family. He had always been the steady hand, the one who kept everything in perspective. But now, even Jack seemed distant, his gaze often lingering on the horizon, as though he too could feel that something was coming. One evening, as Amy was walking through the barn, she felt a sudden chill in the air. It was as if the shadows were longer, the barn quieter than usual. She paused for a moment, her heart beating a little faster, her senses on high alert. It wasn't just her imagination. Something was different. Then she heard a soft rustle behind her. She spun around, her heart in her throat, but there was nothing there. Just the silence of the barn, the stillness of the horses. Amy shook her head, trying to calm herself. It was just the stress, she told herself. The ranch had been her life for so long, and the weight of Ty's legacy, and the expectations that came with it, was beginning to wear on her. But even as she tried to push the fear aside, she couldn't ignore the growing feeling that she was being watched. Everywhere she went, there was this lingering sense of something unseen, something waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The following morning, the unease deepened when Amy received another call. This time the number was blocked. Her pulse quickened as she answered the phone, an instinctive sense of dread already taking hold. The voice on the other end was distorted, hollow, and cold, like someone trying to hide their true identity. "Amy Fleming," the voice rasped, "you think you've outrun the past, but it's catching up to you. The things you've buried, they're rising again, and this time, there's no escape." The line went dead before Amy could even react. She stood frozen, the phone clutched tightly in her hand. Who was this? What past were they referring to? And why did it feel so personal? Amy had no answers, only questions. She tried to brush it off as a cruel prank, but deep down, she knew better. This wasn't just a random threat. It was a warning that she couldn't ignore. For the rest of the day, Amy couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The ranch that had always been her safe haven now felt suffocating. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside made her jump. The horses, too, were restless, their usually calm demeanor replaced by a nervous energy. Amy's connection with them had always been special, almost intuitive, but now she felt that same unease reflected in their eyes. Lou, noticing Amy's growing agitation, tried to comfort her, but even she seemed unsettled. "You're not just imagining this, Amy," Lou said, her voice tinged with concern. "Something's off. We all feel it." And then, just as things seemed to spiral further, Amy had a chance encounter that would change everything. It was late one evening when she decided to take a walk by the river, the place she always went when she needed clarity. But tonight, the air felt different, heavier, charged with something she couldn't name. As she stood at the water's edge, listening to the rush of the current, she suddenly felt the distinct sensation that she wasn't alone. She glanced around, her heart racing. And then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. At first, Amy couldn't make out who it was. The figure was tall and shadowed, but there was something familiar about the shape. She squinted into the darkness, trying to make sense of it, and then, to her shock, she realized who it was. "Caleb," she whispered, her breath catching in her throat. It had been years since she had seen him. Caleb, Ty's old friend, had been out of their lives for a long time, but there he was, standing across from her, in the darkness by the river. He didn't say a word at first, just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Finally, he stepped forward, his face pale, his eyes wide with something akin to fear. "I never thought I'd see you here again," Amy said, her voice trembling slightly. Caleb looked at her with a mix of sadness and urgency. "Amy, there's something you don't know. Something I should have told you a long time ago. They're coming for you. They're coming for the ranch." Amy's heart skipped a beat. "Who? Who's coming for us?" Before Caleb could answer, the sound of tires screeching on the dirt road interrupted their conversation. Amy turned, startled, But when she looked back at Caleb, he was gone. Vanished. As if he had never been there at all. Amy stood frozen, her mind racing. Had Caleb been trying to warn her? What did he mean by they? And why had he disappeared so suddenly? One thing was clear. Someone was coming, and Amy had no idea who they were or what they wanted. The storm was closing in, and she was standing right in the center of it. The next day, as Amy shared Caleb's cryptic warning with Lou and Jack, the reality of the situation began to set in. Jack, usually the steady one, seemed unusually tense. "We've been through a lot together, Amy," he said gravely. "But this feels different. We need to find out who's behind this, and we need to do it fast." Amy knew Jack was right. There was no more time to waste. The storm was coming, and if they didn't act soon, they might not have the chance to stop what was about to unfold. Amy couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that the web of danger surrounding Heartland was deeper than anyone could have imagined. Caleb's warning only added to the growing sense of urgency that had taken over her every waking moment. She had been trying to keep things as normal as possible for the sake of the ranch and her family, but the weight of the unknown was pressing down on her. It wasn't just about the land anymore, it was something far more personal, and it was coming for everything she loved. The first step in finding answers came when Amy turned her attention back to the legal documents she had unearthed a few days earlier. She sat at the kitchen table, a pile of old, yellowed papers spread out before her, the faded ink barely visible in some places. These documents weren't just records of land disputes, they were evidence of something far more sinister. As she sifted through the papers, her eyes caught a name that made her heart stop. Oliver Rhodes. It was the same name that had haunted her mother, Marion Fleming, all those years ago. Amy had known that Marion had kept secrets about her past, but she had never understood just how far those secrets reached. Oliver Rhodes was a name tied to a dark history, one that Amy had never fully understood until now. As she pieced together the connections, she realized that this wasn't just some random businessman. Rhodes had been involved in shady deals, manipulations, and threats, all aimed at securing control of Heartland and the surrounding land. And now, years later, it seemed that his vendetta against her family was far from over. She could feel the walls closing in, the truth unfolding like a slow, inevitable storm. Amy couldn't afford to wait any longer. She needed to confront the past, and she needed answers. But the more she dug, the more tangled the web became. It wasn't just Oliver Rhodes who had a hand in the dark dealings that had shaped Heartland's history. As Amy reviewed the old records, she discovered that there were others, people who had been tied to Rhodes in ways that were impossible to ignore. Bribes, backroom deals, and covert threats were all part of the twisted game that had played out behind the scenes for years. And Amy's mother had been caught in the middle of it all. Marion had trusted the wrong people, made the wrong decisions, and now it seemed that the consequences of those choices were coming home to roost. Jack, ever the protector, had been trying to keep a cool head as Amy worked through the documents, but when he saw the depth of what she had uncovered, his face grew grim. "This isn't just about us anymore, Amy. This goes back a long way. The past has a way of coming back, and it's coming for us now." Amy nodded, her throat tight with the weight of the revelations. "What do we do, Jack? How do we fight this?" "We fight with everything we have," he said firmly. "We'll get to the bottom of this, together. But we need to be careful. Rhodes is dangerous, and we don't know who else is involved." The next few days were a blur of frantic research, phone calls, and meetings with local law enforcement. Everyone involved in Heartland's history seemed to have their own secrets, their own part in the puzzle, and slowly the pieces began to fall into place. Amy and Jack learned that Rhodes had once had a significant stake in Heartland's development, but his involvement had been masked by layers of deceit. He had been using legal loopholes to manipulate situations, creating a network of allies and enemies in his wake. And now, it seemed that he was preparing to make his move. The discovery of a long-hidden battle over the ranch's ownership came as a chilling shock. Amy had always known that the ranch was important, a place that had been passed down through generations, a symbol of her mother's legacy. But she had never fully understood just how much it was worth to others. It wasn't just a piece of land. It was a pawn in a much larger game. And now, the stakes had never been higher. In a moment of clarity, Amy realized that the ranch, her family, and her very survival were all linked to the decisions Marion had made decades ago. The past wasn't just a series of mistakes, it was a chain of events that had set everything in motion. And now, the storm was coming, and Amy was at its center. The tension around Heartland grew with each passing day. Everyone seemed on edge, their nerves frayed by the constant unease that had taken over the ranch. The horses were more restless than ever, and even the usually calm animals seemed to sense the danger closing in. Amy couldn't help but feel that the danger wasn't just outside, it was already inside, slowly infiltrating the very core of everything she had fought to protect. Then came the final sign, the one that made everything so much clearer. Late one night, as Amy was leaving the stables, she saw a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the ranch, just beyond the tree line. Her heart raced as she instinctively reached for her phone, but before she could make a move, the figure stepped forward into the moonlight and she froze. It was Albert Rhodes, Oliver's estranged brother. Amy's breath caught in her throat. She had heard whispers about Albert, a man who had stayed out of the family's dealings, a figure who had always kept his distance from the darkness that had surrounded his brother. But here he was, standing in front of her, his face expressionless, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. "Albert?" Amy said, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't speak at first, just stared at her with a look that seemed to pierce right through her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke, his voice low and urgent. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Amy. Your mother thought she could escape it, but there's no escaping the past. Rhodes is coming for everything she built, and it's not just the land he wants, it's the legacy. It's you." Amy's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice trembling. Albert's gaze hardened. "You're the final piece of the puzzle. You don't know it yet, but you're part of something much bigger than yourself, and if you don't act fast, there won't be a Heartland left to protect." His words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Amy didn't know what to believe, but one thing was certain. The past wasn't done with her, and the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. The battle for Heartland was no longer just about land. It was about survival, and Amy was running out of time. The days after Albert's cryptic warning seemed to blur together, each one heavier than the last. Amy couldn't shake the sense of impending doom that had settled over her like a dark cloud. She was no longer just concerned for the future of Heartland. Her entire existence now felt tied to the dangerous game that Oliver Rhodes was playing. It wasn't just about the ranch anymore. It wasn't even just about the family. Amy realized, with growing dread, that her very life was at risk. The web that had been spun over the years was tightening around her, and there was no way out. Everywhere she went, she felt eyes on her. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden threat. Even the horses, the animals she had spent her entire life working with, were acting differently, more skittish, uneasy. It was as if they too could sense the storm that was coming. The usually calm atmosphere of Heartland was gone, replaced by a palpable tension that hung in the air. Amy had spent her whole life protecting this place, but now she wasn't sure if it was enough. Rhodes was unpredictable, dangerous, and, worse yet, he had been lurking in the shadows for years, patiently waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment had arrived. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Amy found herself standing at the edge of the ranch, looking out over the land. The horses grazed peacefully in the distance, unaware of the chaos that was about to hit. The wind picked up, the gusts carrying with them a strange sense of finality. Amy couldn't help but think back to the words of Albert. It's not just the land he wants. It's the legacy. It's you. What did he mean by that? What did Oliver Rhodes want with her? And why was he so intent on destroying everything her family had built? She thought of Marion, her mother's quiet strength, her decisions that had shaped the very fabric of Heartland. Marion had always tried to protect Amy from the past, from the darkness that had surrounded her youth, but now it seemed that the past was catching up with them. What had Marion been hiding all those years ago? What had she done that was so terrible that it would lead to this moment, this inevitable confrontation? The more Amy thought about it, the more questions she had, and the more she realized that she couldn't protect Heartland on her own. She needed help. But who could she trust? Jack? Lou? Caleb? They had all been standing by her side. But what if one of them was unknowingly entangled in this web of lies and deceit? What if Rhodes had already made his move from within? It was then that Amy made the decision. She couldn't wait any longer. She needed to act, and she needed to do it now. The first step was to meet with Lou. Amy knew that Lou was the backbone of their family, always looking out for what was best for everyone. Even when the weight of the world seemed to be on her shoulders, she would understand. Together, they could figure out what needed to be done. As Amy walked toward the house, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart sinking as she saw the message flash across the screen. "Get out! It's already too late." The message was from Caleb. Her pulse quickened, her mind racing. What did Caleb mean? Had Rhodes already made his move? Was it too late to save Heartland? Amy's breath hitched as the reality of the situation settled over her like a heavy weight. She had no choice but to face whatever was coming head-on. No more running, no more hiding. It was time to take a stand. When Amy reached the house, Lou was already there, waiting for her at the kitchen table, her expression a mixture of concern and confusion. "Amy, what's going on? I'm getting messages too, but no one is saying anything concrete," Lou said, her voice tight with worry. "You've been acting strange for days now, and I can feel the tension. What aren't you telling me?" Amy took a deep breath and sat down across from Lou, her hands trembling slightly. "It's Rhodes. It's Oliver Rhodes. He's not just after Heartland, he's after me. And I think he's been planning this for a long time." Lou's eyes widened in shock. "What? Amy, you don't mean—" "I do," Amy said, cutting her off. "I think Rhodes has been orchestrating this whole thing from the start. He's been using people, manipulating situations, and now he's closing in. And it's not just about Heartland anymore. It's about me." The words hung heavy in the air. Lou's face drained of color as the realization of the situation sank in. "But why? Why you? What did you do to him?" "I don't know," Amy replied, her voice shaking. "But I think my mom's past with him has something to do with it. I've been going through some old documents, and Rhodes has been involved in every shady deal surrounding this ranch. Every land dispute, every legal loophole, every threat. And it all comes back to him." Lou was silent for a moment, digesting the information. Then slowly, she spoke. "What are we going to do?"